This is one of the most amazing driving experiences I've had in a sim so far. It's bringing together a few key ingredients on both the hard and software side that in some represent a big step forward that sim racing has made over the past couple of years. Hey everybody, and welcome to the Sim channel for an episode that is a bit different from most of the other videos on this channel. Today I'm telling you what makes the car that you're seeing here and the experience of driving it just a little more special to me than most others. To this end, let's go back a few years. I started sim racing about 20-something years ago with microprocessed GP2. Back then it was pretty normal to drive with a keyboard. A for gas, Z for brakes, comma and dot for the steering, and space for shifts if I recall correctly. To get out of a corner, we slammed on the A key like woodpeckers, and few people really gave analog input methods much of a thought. A little while later, I moved on to Gran Turismo and Gran Turismo 2 on the PlayStation, which, despite lacking a cockpit camera, were a big step up from GP2 in terms of technology, owed to the astonishingly fast development of computer hardware back at the time. The standard input device for these games was Sony's DualShock controller, and even though it still lacked analog buttons, it played a big role in the evolution of the driving experience at the time. The next step for me came with Gran Turismo 3 on the PS2, which for the first time featured analog inputs for gas, brakes and steering on the console's new DualShock 2 controller. I remember reading everything I could find about the game pre-release, and I was in the store on day one to finally get my hands on that sweet red DVD case. This one was a game changer for me, and it may still today be the game I've clocked most hours in. I loved it to bits, and it was also the first game I played with a steering wheel. First the Logitech GT Force, and later the Momo Force. I even had my first sim rig back then, years before sim rigs became a thing. Custom made from wood by a carpenter, and equipped with an old Recaro sports seat that I had gotten from my uncle's car. I hung on to the rig for GT4, which I also played extensively for a while. With F1 2002 and the various mods that were available for it at the time, I also had my first PC sim racing experience in it since GP2. However, at some point my interest in games and sim racing started to fade, and by the time the PlayStation 3 hit the market, I had pretty much turned my back on all things video games. I kept loyal to Motorsports as a whole, but I was more interested in the real thing than its simulated counterpart. Every now and then though, I checked to see if there was anything happening in the sim racing world that would make me want to get back into it. More than superb graphics or any of the supposedly realistic but strangely difficult to handle physics models that I could find chatter about online, I was interested in the core driving experience. I was looking for a sim that would feel believable to me, that could immerse me into the virtual world and create the illusion of driving a real car. Unfortunately, it never really seemed to click for me, and what I was looking for seemed miles away at the time. This changed when the first bits of information on Assetto Corsa surfaced about 7 years ago. Those who had tried it reported that it finally felt like you drove a car connected to the road via big sticky rubber tires, that you could feel the weight of the car shift believably, and that you had a fighting chance of saving that slide instead of the car going into an unrecoverable spin. So when the first Assetto Corsa tech preview was finally announced in 2014, I started looking for a steering wheel to go with it and landed on the highly praised Thrustmaster T500 RS, second at the time only to the vastly more expensive Fanatec Club Sport wheelbase. Even though I had to clamp the wheel to my desk for the first couple of years, this package as a whole was still a big step up from my first sim rig on the PS2 a decade earlier. The physics were more believable and vastly more realistic, and laser scan circuits helped to further improve the experience. The force feedback was detailed and communicative, and for the first time it felt somewhat close to driving a real car around a track, or at least how I imagined it would feel. I think it's fair to say that this combo taught me a lot about driving physics and helped me greatly improve my driving technique over the years. Here I learned how not to overdrive a car, how to handle a wide range of behaviors from understeery to snappy, how to drift, and also how to heel and toe. But the experience wasn't without its flaws. On the side of the simulation, there's the car's unpredictable behavior on curbs that has never stopped bugging me and is still keeping me from touching certain car and track combos today. And on the hardware side, well, the T500, as good as it was for its price, won't fool anyone into believing the handling a real car, even when put onto a sim rig and paired with a set of Huizenbelt pedals. The rather weak and notchy feeling force feedback, the way the wheel and wheelbase flexed under strain, and also its plasticky outward appearance always kept my personal level of immersion in check. And so I kept looking for the next real step up, which finally brings us to today. It took me another few years to get here, but when I fired up ACC with the 991 Cup a few days ago, something clicked for me. And it's again not any single component of the puzzle that has changed, but rather a number of things that have come together over the past few years, which in sum finally lift my sim racing experience to the level I've been looking for, and that seemed miles out of reach for a very long time. So what are these things? First, there's the arrival of Assetto Corsa Competizione, building up on Assetto Corsa's acclaimed physics model and benefiting from the good ties of its developer, Kuno Simulazioni, to a number of racing teams in the Blancpain GT3 series which the game recreates. Based in many aspects on data and measurements from the actual cars, I have every reason to believe that the physics model of the cars in-game is about the closest we've gotten to the real thing in a commercial release so far. It certainly helps that Kuno's could, with two little exceptions, focus its development efforts on a single class of racing cars and a single tire compound, giving them the opportunity to really flesh out the tire physics, but also other aspects impacting the car's behavior, such as, for example, the ABS and traction control logic. And then there's the newly released 5-point tire model in ACC that finally fixes essentially all curb-related issues the game has had, and notably improves the experience of driving the cars. This is, to me, the single biggest and most important step in Kuno's physics simulation since the first AC Tech preview. The way the car behaves over curbs is now a lot more believable, and we can finally take the same lines we see the real drivers take, without fear of being randomly sent into a spin when getting on a curb. But it's not just the simulation that has improved greatly over the past couple of years. The availability of direct drive wheels at almost reasonable price points is another factor. The asking price for strong direct drive wheelbases has come down to about €1,000 give or take, which I believe is less than half of what it was 5 years ago, while the price per quality in consumer wheels is more or less stagnating. The experience that can be had with a direct drive wheelbase is simply on another level from what you get out of belt-driven wheels. Some credit also has to go to Fanatec, who brought direct drive into the mainstream and equipped game developers with their products. Which leads me straight to the next point. On my last livestream here on YouTube, I had the honor of welcoming Aris, responsible for the car physics at Kuno's, in the chat. Not only did he give some good advice to improve my weak driving on tracks I wasn't very familiar with, but he also shared his force feedback settings for the game and in his Fanatec DD2 wheelbase. In particular, his settings for dynamic damping in-game and force feedback intensity, or FEI, in the wheelbase helped me to get rid of the slightly excessive sharpness of the force feedback, increasing the perceived realism of the haptic sensations that are provided by the wheel. So, for the Fanatec DD1 and DD2 users in the audience, here are my current settings for ACC and the wheelbase. Finally, the inclusion of the Porsche 991.2 Cup in ACC as one of only 2 non-GT3 cars to date is significant to me for 2 reasons. The first one is that, to me personally, this car feels distinctly believable in ACC. It feels smaller and heavier than the GT3s, has less downforce and no traction control. As a result, it's a bit more of a handful to drive, but in my eyes, this only helps the immersion. The steering forces in corners are notably higher than, for example, in its GT3 sibling, and you feel the weight of the car shift around a little more. Altogether, it feels a bit closer to a street car, giving me personally more to connect with. The second reason is that I got myself a genuine Porsche 991.2 Cup steering wheel to put on my sim rig a couple of months ago, so I'm now driving this simulated car with the actual steering wheel from the real one. I've already made a video about the wheel a little while ago, so I won't go into detail about it here. However, even though it won't really differ much from similar offerings by other brands in terms of how it feels, for me it does make this experience just a little more special than it would otherwise be. Now, what all of this amounts to is the single most believable, realistic and immersive experience I've had in a sim so far. The way the car behaves over bumps and curbs is pretty much exactly how I would expect the real car to behave, and haptically, it finally has this rubbery note to it. The tires feel reasonably soft as you go over curbs, but the feedback is still detailed and makes me feel very connected to the road. When I get into a slide, it's very quick to tell me what exactly is needed to catch the car. Put the great visuals and exceptional sound design of ACC into the mix, and I don't have a single complaint with regard to the driving experience. Unfortunately, I have no way of knowing how close to the real thing this actually is. But it's exactly what I was looking for, and it's finally here. This is the kind of experience that seemed completely out of reach just a few years ago. Granted, I may have had to spend a little more than I was hoping for in the beginning, but I have no regrets. So I guess a thank you is in order to those who made this possible, the pioneers of direct drive technology in sim racing, Fanatec who brought it into the mainstream, Kuno Simulazioni and Aris for creating this wonderful simulation, but also to the sim racing community for creating a market for these devices that ultimately allow us to have this kind of experience in a sim. Ultimately, all of this raises the question, what's next? Well, on the hardware side, I'm hoping that the trend towards more affordable direct drive wheels continues so that more and more sim racers can get to enjoy this experience at home. For me personally, the next logical step would probably be a set of transducers, but I have no immediate plans to upgrade my rig in that direction. Or should I say funds? Anyway, I guess it's good to have something left to look forward to in the future. On the side of the simulation, I believe we're getting closer to mastering the driving aspect, and I hope we can eventually get closer to mastering the racing aspect as well. Here, I'm seeing 3 points that need improvement. There's the collision physics and damage models that, to date, still leave something to be desired in most or all sims. Then there's the AI, which, with few exceptions, has rarely been able to deliver a reliable racing environment in sims and has generally not seen a whole lot of progress over the past decade or so. Finally, there's online racing, which outside of iRacing still suffers from a lack of organization, proper matchmaking, and generally ways to have clean and close racing without joining a league or planning individual races weeks ahead in small communities. Luckily, there are signs that all three of these aspects are starting to turn around. There's an impressive all-new damage model in the works at iRacing, we've seen the announcement of a machine learning-based AI in MotoGP 19, and ACC puts a lot of focus on driver ratings as voices in the community asking for proper matchmaking and scheduled races outside of iRacing are getting louder. All in all, this makes me hopeful that over the next, say, 5 to 8 years, the racing aspect will catch up with the driving aspect in simulated motorsports. Now, let me know what you think in the comments below. Would you agree that we've recently seen a big step up in the core driving experience, or is something still keeping you from making that assessment? Finally, I'll leave you with some driving impressions of the 911 Cup car at Brands Hatch. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and see you in the next video.